We have lots to discuss here in today's video, including some offseason trade speculation around a handful of teams, including the Vancouver Canucks, the Boston Bruins, the Columbus Blue Jackets, the Chicago Blackhawks, and the New Jersey Devils. Plus, we have some contract extension projections from some NHL insiders regarding some top players like Connor McDavid, Kyle Connor, and Kirill Kaprizov. Plus, we have some further things to discuss around the verdict that came out earlier today regarding the 2018 World Junior players that were facing assault charges. We now have statements from the NHL and the NHLPA about what comes next for them if they wanted to return to NHL action. We'll discuss all that coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to discuss here in today's video, and we're going to start things off with the topic of the day, which we did a video on earlier, of course, discussing the verdict that came on the trial for the 5 former NHL players that were facing charges of assault. Of course, we know Michael McLeod, Carter Hart, Alex Formenton, Dylan Dubé, and Cal Foote. I guess I can just call them all former players because they've all been out of the league now for a minimum of a year, and in some cases longer, especially in the case of Alex Formenton, who hasn't played an NHL game. I believe it's been 3 years, because I know he played a couple of years in Switzerland and has since given up hockey and has been working in a different industry altogether for the past year or so. So, of course, today's verdict was a very long, drawn-out explanation from the judge, and certainly explained her rationale and reasonings for everything, which is pretty normal in these big cases, and ended up resulting in a not guilty verdict for all 5 players on all charges. Of course, like I said, we discussed at great length in the other video, so I'm not going to go into everything that the judge had to say. I went through a lot of the key talking points in their decision, and we already went through that. Just to kind of summarize, essentially, the judge basically said that she didn't feel like the evidence and the testimony from the complainant, known as EM, was reliable. There was a lot of inconsistencies within the testimony and the previous discussions with investigators. Just a lot of things didn't end up that she didn't feel like there was, that the prosecution they could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these players did not have consent and that they were guilty of the said charges. Essentially, that's the job of the Crown, is they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the complainants' complaints are verified and that the defense are guilty. And of course, the defense lawyers in their case is completely different. Their job is to defend their clients and to prove to show reasonable doubt as to why those charges should not be found guilty. Right? So completely different scenario. So the judge delivered the not guilty verdicts on all counts. According to the reporters that were in the courtroom, there was quite a mix of reactions. I know a lot of the reactions from the friends and family of the players that were present seemed to be, I guess, obviously in favor of the verdict. And I know anybody that was supporting EM obviously disappointed in the outcome here. Now, we have since had a statement from the National Hockey League and the National Hockey League Players Association. I know there are some writers that already had articles out pretty early, shortly after this came out, basically saying what's next for these players. Could they return to the National Hockey League? I know some people were giving him a pretty hard time on social media, saying it's too soon for these articles, but essentially the way I look at it is the NHL and the NHLPA want to make statements about this. If you're a reporter, you're covering the game, it's your job to kind of analyze and talk about what's being said. So essentially, the NHL has made it pretty clear through their statement that these players cannot just automatically sign a contract and go back to work. That's not going to be the case. The NHL statement is as follows. It says that the allegations made in this case, even if not determined to have been criminal, were very disturbing, and the behavior at issue here was unacceptable. We will be reviewing and considering the judge's findings. While we conduct that analysis and determine next steps, the players charged in this case are ineligible to play in the league. Now, the NHL Players Association have responded to the NHL statement with a statement of their own, and even though we've seen them get along very well through the whole CBA process and lots of labor peace, etc., they do seem to have a very different opinion on this matter in this particular case. The NHLPA statement basically says that after missing more than a year, more than a full season of their careers, that they should now have the opportunity to return back to work. They said the players, while the ruling of the players being ineligible to the return while the NHL further investigates this case, does not align with the terms of the collective bargaining agreement. So they feel that the NHL with the CBA do not have the right to basically hold up these players' careers while they decide and further investigate what the courts and the judge has had to say in this case. Now, I'm not a CBA expert. I mean, I try to learn as much as I can about it, especially during this new process here. And I'd have to go back and look through to see exactly where everything stands. But essentially, I do know that the NHL, I believe, have the right to suspend or make players ineligible based on their behavior. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a criminal activity that can cause a player to lose their ability to participate and play and earn money as a National Hockey League player. So I'm not sure. Obviously, I know the National Hockey League Players Association clearly would know the CBA better than I would, and obviously they stand behind their statement. So we'll have to see how this goes from here. Obviously, the belief was all along, though, that the players would have to have a meeting with Gary Bettman, just like we saw in other cases like Stan Bowman and Joel Quenneville. Of course, they were marked ineligible to work in the National Hockey League for an undetermined period of time until they had a chance to meet with Gary Bettman and kind of show that they've done enough work to show that they should be allowed another chance. And essentially that appears to be a similar situation here. So it doesn't mean that they're even going to make them necessarily do anything further. They were found not guilty, but as I said in that video before, and to be honest, the comment section in that video was not a very fun place to be looking at earlier, although for the most part, the comments were pretty consistent. I think most people seem to be favorable for the players to be returning to work because they were found not guilty. And I had a couple that were, I don't know, just really giving it to me, saying that I needed to apologize and whatnot, that I vilified these players in the past and I basically had them as guilty and all this. I'm like, I've never done that. One of the few people on this app that will report on the tough subjects. A lot of channels that talk about and report on hockey business and stuff around the NHL did not even want to talk about this at all. It's a touchy, tough subject. I don't shy away from that stuff. All I've ever done is talk about the facts of what we've known. And now I probably had said, and I'm pretty sure I did, that the accusations were pretty heinous, and that any if it were true, that they should face pretty severe consequences, because some of the stuff that we heard that they were accused of was just reprehensible behavior, and I would not condone that kind of behavior in any kind of situation. So, and I stand by that kind of talk and statement. I'm not going to change my stance on that. Now, they've gone through their trial, they've had due process, and they were found not guilty. Okay, so in the court of law's opinion, they didn't do anything wrong, or at least not enough to cause them to go to jail. Now, I've seen some people also say there's a difference between not guilty and innocent. Essentially, in this justice system, which is, I think, pretty common in a lot of jurisdictions, is that sometimes you kind of have a gut feeling that criminal activity did take place, but that the prosecution didn't do a good enough job to prove it, and therefore they can't get a guilty verdict. And that does sometimes happen. Sometimes things can look bad, they can look incriminating, but that's why there's process, right? And the judge, like she said, I have to go by, what's, proof beyond a reasonable doubt here. That's like the cornerstone of the law. She said, there's the whole statement of believe victims, and you want to believe victims, but you can't go into a case thinking I'm going to believe the victims, because if you're believing the victim, you're automatically assuming guilt on the defendants, and that's not fair. You have to be impartial, and you have to be able to see all sides of the case to determine a proper outcome from a legal perspective, right? So again, for the handful of people in the comments, I just wanted to address that. I've never said anything to vilify these players. I at most, and I would not change anything what I said when the accusations were first come out, when we first learned about the charges and all of the details of the things that they were being accused of. Those were heinous and reprehensible acts. If those happened the way that they claim to have been, and if they were done without consent. The judge feels like there was consent in this case, and those players were found not guilty. They had their day in court. They won their case. So be it. So that's where I stand. I just report on the facts. I don't really have an opinion one way or the other, except to, I might give an opinion on what was out there like that, but that's it. So, come on, keep the comment section. If you want to give your opinion on whether or not it should be back to work or not, and I understand that there's going to be a mix of opinions out there. There's a lot of people feel like, they were found not guilty. They should totally be allowed back to work. And if you look at the NHL, I won't be surprised if they are allowed back to work. If you look at, the standard they've set with other players, doing things that have kind of caused cause them to lose their ability to be in the league and then have to be let back in. Okay, I won't be shocked if they are reinstated or made eligible again to be in the NHL. So we'll see. But those are the statements from the NHL. That's the statement from the NHLPA. Clearly, they're going to have a little bit of battle on their hands. And remember, the NHLPA's job here is to battle on behalf of the players. And if the players haven't been convicted of a crime, then they're going to battle on their behalf for their ability to work. That's their role, and that's what they're doing here. And I would expect that. How I'm not giving you my opinion. I'm just again stating the facts on what each side is talking about and where those stances comes from. So we will see where things go in that. It's hard to say what's going to play out here, but. I guess you want to state your opinions. I encourage that, and hopefully we can have a healthy, mature discussion about, what transpired here and how the NHL and the NHLPA should handle this moving forward. Now, I just hit pause on the video here to continue on. We do have some breaking news to add to this video now as well. The Carolina Hurricanes have just announced a mega extension for youngster Jackson Blake. Jackson Blake inks an 8-year contract extension with Carolina with an average annual value of $5.6 million per season, giving him a total of around $45 million. That's a pretty good contract. I know Blake, as a full rookie last year, had like 17 goals, 34 points. He led all rookies in game-winning goals as well. Had himself a nice season. I know Carolina really sees him as being a big part of the team's future, playing in a pretty consistent top 6 role. So considering the value on that of 5.6 with a rising cap and the fact that he's young enough that he's, in theory, should continue to improve and to get closer and closer to whatever his ceiling is going to be, even if it's not a whole lot higher than what he is now, even if he's just a consistent 20-goal, 40, 50-point guy, $5.6 million is a darn good number for a player of that magnitude. So I really think that the Hurricanes and Blake have hit themselves a jackpot contract there. I mean, in all honesty, for him, it's he obviously prefers the security on the 8-year deal as opposed to going shorter term and being able to cash in at a higher number and whether it be 2, 3, 4, or 5 years down the road, whatever it may be. Obviously, both sides are content to have him be part of the team for a long time as well. So all in all, I think that's a pretty good contract. Now, speaking of contracts, lots of projections here from some of the NHL insiders here in recent days through various video or radio hits that they've made, looking at some of the top players in the league. I know Dave Pagnotta on a radio hit here talking about what he feels the Connor McDavid extension is going to look like. He estimates that it's probably going to be around 5 years. He doesn't think McDavid will go 7 or 8 years. We'll have to see on that. Of course, most people think that he's going to go with the shorter term, but it will be his last opportunity to do an 8-year contract with the contract rules changing in the NHL, and it feels it's going to be somewhere in the $16 million range. Obviously, that's going to be a big jump over what he's making now with a rising cap. Really, McDavid, any one player can have a maximum of 20% of the salary cap, and if there's anybody who can justify taking the biggest chunk, it's him. But I mean, that still wouldn't be a full 20%, but $16 million range. He said maybe it could even be a little higher, but that's kind of what he's estimating on that one. So we'll see. Frank Saravalli had an opinion on both Kyle Connor and Kirill Kaprizov. With Connor, he says that that's a big priority for the Jets to try to get done to get him locked up, ideally before the season starts. Ideally, if they can get him to do a long-term extension, he's probably going to be close to $12 million, $11 to $12 million range. So that would be a huge deal. I know there's a lot of teams, including I would suspect his hometown or home state of Detroit, looking at him as a potential UFA target if he makes it there next year. Kirill Kaprizov, of course, we know in Minnesota they've had ongoing discussions, and so far they're not close, according to Wild writer Michael Russo. He says that there's still quite a big gap there, but Saravalli feels that Kaprizov is likely looking at somewhere in that $15 million range too. Like, he's probably going to surpass Leon Draisaitl and won't be too far off from McDavid. He'll likely will be the highest paid winger for sure in the NHL. So some pretty massive extensions that could be coming in the NHL here in the coming weeks or early months here as we get ready for the 25-26 NHL season. Now, some trade speculation to look at as well. I know fourthperiod.com and Dave Pagnotta reporting that the Chicago Blackhawks are still a team, like a bunch of them, that are not quite done doing business and are not quite happy to go into the season with what they have. They still want to add and try to improve this roster, be a little more competitive. And one of the names that a lot of teams have been calling on is the young forward Lukas Reichel. The Blackhawks are willing to listen on Reichel. I think that it's not a given for sure that they move him, but if they can get a good player coming back that they feel really improves the roster, for more than a short-term basis. Obviously, they're not really in the market for something like that, given where they're at with their rebuild. That Reichel would be a player that they would be willing to consider moving. So certainly keep your eye on Lukas Reichel if the Blackhawks are going to make any kind of moves. He's one of the young players that could go. Columbus, according to the fourthperiod.com, also wants to add an impact player, which doesn't surprise me to hear this. Throughout the offseason, we've heard a lot of speculation around Don Waddell and the Blue Jackets. They've been in on a lot of top talent that have moved and changed teams and really haven't been too successful on making a big roster, improvement in that sense. They got some internal business done. We saw minimal change, but generally with all the big names that they haven't been able to get it done. But the Blue Jackets are still working on it. We know that Yegor Chinakhov is out there because he wants to trade, but another player that they are willing to dangle and have had in trade conversations as they continue to try to evaluate and add to this roster is Dmitry Voronkov. Voronkov is a player that I think teams would be interested in. He's still another guy that I think is still kind of scratching the surface and will continue to get better. He's still on the younger side of things. So Chinakhov and Voronkov, both in Columbus, are available. Fourthperiod.com also reporting on the Boston Bruins. On when it comes to Pavel Zacha, who we've touched on before this offseason, one thing that was new that I had just heard was that not only are they exploring trading him now, but apparently they did explore trading Zacha during the season as well. Of course, once things started to fall off the rails and the Bruins started to sink in the standings, we know they started to move pieces and continued to do so right up to the NHL trade deadline. And Zacha was one of those names that they seriously considered and they had many conversations about, but never pulled the trigger. So they've re-examined doing that this offseason. So far, haven't found a deal that they like enough to pull the trigger. Of course, the main team we've heard linked to Zacha has been the Vancouver Canucks, who we know has also been a team that's still out there looking to especially improve its center depth. So he would certainly add to that. Could be a good number two behind Elias Pettersson. So we'll see. I know Toronto hasn't been linked to Zaka, but they've also reported that the Leafs are definitely not done. Even though they've added a bunch of forwards, that they would still like to try to upgrade and add a higher impact forward if they can. And from some of these insiders are saying that the Leafs have been involved with anybody who's like a higher end player that have moved. They've been in and around all the forwards. They just really haven't been able to add anybody of significance, like, a big name that's, a more productive player. We've seen them get some players that could be good gems for them. It's hard to say, like between Michelli and Joshua. But they do, obviously losing Marner, I still think is a big blow, and they would like to add. I don't think they were ever trying to add like a $10 million player or anything of that nature, but just somebody who's a little bit more solid, reliable in the top six than, guys that are coming in with potential, but obviously come with a little bit of risk because of the fact they've had down seasons and are, kind of like a reclamation project, if you will. So we'll see what they do there. Dougie Hamilton in New Jersey. Frank Saravalli was reporting on talking about him with the Devils lately, saying how they did flirt with trading him, especially earlier in the offseason. And there have been points where he feels that they just look at his cap hit as being a little bit out of whack, and that, they feel that they might be able to get a better balance. They have lots of young D who can move up in the lineup. I don't think they're too concerned about from a defensive perspective. If they were to move them, they can backfill that internally even, but they could have an opportunity to add with other areas, specifically in the forward group. But so far, I've not found something that works for them. There's some people out there that are convinced that they are interested in maybe moving Hamilton, but they might want to wait and hold on to him. Eventually, if they're able to bring Quinn Hughes from Vancouver, which I know we don't know that for sure. Quinn Hughes is a player that obviously has been, after the Jim Rutherford comments about wanting to play with his brothers and all that, kind of exploded. It's kind of died down here as of late. But if the Devils do feel like there's a possibility they could make that work before Quinn's contract is up, if they were going to make a move, Hamilton would probably be a prime piece of the pie here that they would add in the mix in a package to try to land him. It's going to take more than Dougie Hamilton to get Quinn Hughes out of Vancouver, clearly, but it would at least give a solid, productive defenseman going back to them, which would be very important to Vancouver if they're ever going to do that. Now, I don't think Vancouver pulls a trade off on Quinn Hughes unless he kind of barges into Rutherford and Alvin's offices and say, hey, I want out of here, which I don't think is going to happen just yet. Clearly, with the contract still having some time on it, I think it's probably at least a year away. When they get into that final year, and if they can have discussions that he's not looking like he's going to extend, then I think they need to protect themselves. But it'll be a little while before we see a Hughes trade. I think that's probably fair, barring some significant change that we just don't see coming. So will the Devils hang on to Hamilton that long? I don't know, because like I said, I can understand how they would consider moving him for another return, just because of the fact that they have a lot of other D. So, and would Vancouver take Hamilton anyway? We don't really know. I don't imagine they've had any real conversations around that. They might prefer one of the younger D, right? So would they prefer Nemec or Casey or one of those guys, right? So we'll see what happens. But Hamilton is a player that's out there. I think the Devils are intrigued about the idea of moving him, but don't really feel any need to rush into that unless there's a deal that they just can't pass up. So let me know your thoughts on all today's news and rumors in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.